morning and good evening to everybody. My name is Sourabh Gupta. I am a senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Welcome to our latest event, which is titled the 100,000K Visa Wall, How New H-1B Rules Could Reshape America's Talent Pipeline. Obviously, this is a very topical event. It's a dicey and a slightly dangerous moment. On September 19th, President Trump put out a proclamation which really, which sets out a very, very tall fee for future H-1B applications, which might all have the effect of almost killing the program in some respects. We don't know how permanent this is going to be. I assume, and I hope it will be reviewed after a period of time. The proclamation says that it will be reviewed in a year's time. Nonetheless, at this point of time, we must take it as it is and move forward on that basis. Let me make two very quick points out here. The first point is this is very much in keeping with how Mr. Trump has gone about his business since becoming president. In the first term of his, within 3 months of coming into office, he did have an executive order called Hire Americans, or I think it was Buy American and Hire American, where he did have, we must review the H-1B program. This time around, there's no, let's review the program. Let's just impose a massive steep fee, which might almost kill the program. The second dimension is, in the first term, Mr. Trump wanted to do a lot of protectionist things, but he kind of hesitated a little bit. What legal authority will he have to do many of his protectionist maneuvers? He even toyed around with utilizing the International Economic Emergency Powers Act to kind of impose tariffs, but he kind of then withdrew and never utilized that. This time, from the get-go, from early on, and particularly the reciprocal tariffs have all been under IEEPA, National Security Authority, which might actually get killed in the courts in a month's time or a month and a half. We'll have to see, but he has used this sort of National Security Emergency Authority. And even in the case of this H-1B visas, he's using an authority which talks about these workers of H-1B workers being detrimental to the interests of the United States. So it's very vague, broadly worded. So let me leave it at that. There's a lot of real interesting discussion to take forward in this regard. Let me briefly introduce the speakers now. Just as a format, let me introduce the format. Each of the speakers will speak for about 6 to 8 minutes, and then all the other panelists will enter into a question and discussion phase with that speaker for another 6 to 8 minutes. Then we move on to the next speaker, and then thereafter we will take audience questions and have a discussion. Quickly, let me get to our panelists. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Denis Simon. He's the chairman of the Alliance of Global Talent Organizations. He has held very senior academic positions, including as Executive Vice Chancellor of Duke Kunshan University from 2015 to 2020. He was also awarded China's National Friendship Award in 2006. Next, after that, we will go to Ms. Tahmina Watson. She's an accomplished immigration attorney representing US and multinational companies, investors, and startups, as well as handling family immigration matters. She is host of Tahmina Talks Immigration, a popular radio show turned podcast, and she is a national spokesperson for the American Immigration Lawyers Association and a recipient of the 2019 AILA President's Commendation Award. Third, we will go to Professor Yingyi Ma. She is professor in the Sociology Department of Syracuse University and a non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program of the Brookings Institution. She is the author of Ambitious and Anxious: How Chinese Students Succeed and Struggle in American Higher Education, as well as the lead editor of Understanding International Students from Asia and in American Universities, Learning and Living Globalization. Finally, we will turn to Giovanni Peri. He is the C. Brian Cameron Distinguished Professor of Economics at UC Davis and founder and director of its Global Migration Center. His research focuses on the economic determinants and consequences of international migrations and immigration policies, and he has published around 100 articles in refereed academic journals and has had numerous citations. Let me stop there. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I think that we've entered a really very interesting period, and I think that we have to look at contextually. If we look at what's going on in the United States, it stands in sharp contrast to what has just happened in China. The Chinese government has just introduced something called the K visa, which is exactly 180 degrees different than what has just happened in the United States. In the United States, we have now basically, as you said, perhaps put the kibosh on the H-1B program, and particularly in terms of the incentive and the welcome mat that would be out there for foreigners. We're talking about approximately 85,000 workers, 65,000 who fall under the annual quotas, and another 20,000 who come under the non-cap provisions of the law. And just to give you some idea, the data is very interesting here. 71% of the people covered this past year were from South Asia and particularly India. 12% were from China, and the rest from other parts of the world. The provisions that the Trump administration now has put in place are not anti-China in that sense, so even though there's a lot of other legislation, they really are meant to do what he says to counter the abuse of the H-1B program, to deter wage undercutting, to protect the U.S. workforce. The Secretary of Commerce, in response to when President Trump made the announcement, said, if we're going to train somebody, we might as well train an American worker for this new job rather than train someone who's coming from abroad. So the idea that Americans are being displaced by foreigners and that therefore has some long-term national security implications is really the crux of the matter. And I think that, to me, what really is, there are a couple key points here. Number one, does the president actually have the authority to put in place such legislation? Does he have statutory or constitutional authority to impose such a high fee without any kind of formal legislation? And as you may know, most new legislation is covered under something called the Administrative Procedure Act. That is, that there must be a notice and the required comment for new legislation like this, and we have not gone through any period like that. So it makes good sense to see that almost immediately the Trump initiative was immediately countered with multiple lawsuits, particularly out in the Northern District of California, where the unions and tech companies, universities, healthcare organizations, they all challenged his proclamation, and we have to see how that also, works through the court. For me, the most important issue is the impact on the U.S. talent pipeline. It's very clear that we have a shortage of STEM workers in the United States. If you look at the number of PhDs that are employed in the U.S. workforce, 45% of those PhDs are foreign born. I wonder if we are going to cut or curtail or reduce or make more cumbersome the process, how that is going to impact the ability of the United States to bring new talent. Because as I suggested here, I think it will begin to hurt us. And it has reverberations in terms of overall U.S. competitiveness and as well as U.S. innovative system. Many of the people that are part of the world of startups, and I'm sure we're going to hear that from Tahmina, that they are foreign born. They're the ones that have taken advantage of these opportunities. And the most important, these have served the United States very, very well in terms of our high-tech, cutting-edge businesses, where a lot of startups, not only in Silicon Valley, but across the country, have taken place. So I, look at this with a great deal of concern. And as I started off with, it is somewhat even more shocking when looked at in the context of just the opposite action that the Chinese have now taken in order to provide a more hospitable welcome mat for foreign-born talent to come to China. You don't even need, under this law, you do not even need a job offer. If you have an idea for starting a new business and you want to go to China, the Chinese will issue you one of these K visas. So why our two countries are headed in the opposite direction? I'm afraid that at the end of the day, the United States may have, with this regulation, may have lost the talent war even before it started. And I'm very concerned if this stays in place for more than a few months. I think it will do almost irreparable damage.
Thanks, Dennis. That was helpful. Please, I'm going to jump in with a question for Dennis, but please, anyone and everybody can please jump in and ask him questions or just have comments in that regard. Dennis, my question is, your one of your great area of specialization obviously is in the U.S.-China area and in terms of academic exchanges. How does it impact that particular sphere? Tell us a little bit in terms of how it will impact Chinese students. For example, who is this? This is Elon Musk and his Grok X and his AI and all. There are lots of Chinese, let's say H-1Bs out there and Chinese nationals. How does it impact in those areas?
Okay, so we had a height of Chinese students coming to the United States in 2019 of over 370,000. That number has dropped 2 years ago to 290, then to 270, and this current year we're down to about 255. Okay, now part of the reason why many Chinese came to the United States was not only for an advanced education, but also for extensive work experience and also the possibility of launching a career in the United States. The pattern changed slightly after the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, when also H-1Bs became very difficult to get, and a lot of Chinese had returned to China. But right now, and particularly with the AI revolution, we're seeing that most of the doctorates that have been given out in the United States to foreign born, and particularly to Chinese, those Chinese have stayed in the United States. And so one really wonders if we're going to curtail the ability of these people to come. And it's not only in terms of the specifics of the legislation, it's in the whole change in the environment about welcoming foreign nationals to become part of the fabric of the United States technology and research community. I think the actions, at least under the current tensions in Sino-US relations, add more uncertainty to a Chinese who's saying, is it really now worth it for me to come to the United States? Maybe I'll go to Canada, maybe I'll go to the UK or Australia, where I may be much more welcome and have even better job prospects, since all those countries seem anxious to bring talent into their countries, unlike the United States.
No, exactly. I totally agree with you. Let me also ask, just I know we're talking talent and we're talking kind of high-priced talent, but H-1Bs don't just go only to tech workers. It goes to a much wider spectrum of students and who do different disciplines, which don't start off with that sort of starting salary. And I don't know what the market is in say in the AI in for AI entry level workers, but I can think of say a top-notch economics doctorate holder from MIT who will not get an H-1B visa because who's going to pay 100,000 K for just his visa application? And somebody of that stature could become, say, a chief the head of the IMF, I mean, 20 years down the line or something like that. I mean, we're talking talent of that quality. And really, how does anyone surmount that wall?
Well, I think we have to remember that 71% of H-1B visas went to Indian applicants. A lot of those people are programmers. They're in some cases basic programmers or even advanced programmers. And I think the Trump administration is very concerned that that job category, broadly defined, is sucking in talent from abroad and is ignoring the opportunities to make U.S. Citizens more well trained to be able to take on those jobs. I think you have a very good point that it's not only at the high end of the spectrum where this accounts, it's across the board in many cases. Reading some things, rural hospitals out in the United States that need to get doctors and medical personnel to come. many of whom have been and had their initial training abroad and then come to the United States, maybe for nursing or something of that sort. They're willing to go out to these areas, but if you have to pay $100,000 bounty, these small rural hospitals are not going to be able to afford to bring the necessary healthcare talent, medical talent, and other people, that are going to be needed to help those rural areas keep pace in the U.S. So particularly, I worry much more about the healthcare area. But again, we have to go back to this same principle. When people come here, they're coming here for a better life. They want to become part of the fabric of U.S. society. And so far, there is no evidence at all, whether it's in the academic literature or whether it's in the common sense verbiage between people, that these foreign workers, particularly at the end of the spectrum we're talking about, have done any damage. If anything, if you look at the numbers of foreign-born PhDs and you look at the numbers of patents that are generated and any kind of indicator of advanced contribution to the science and technology development of the United States, you see right at the cutting edge of this all of these foreign-born individuals. So I don't understand the logic, even though the claim is meant that we want to counter the abuse in the system. Sure, every system that's run by a government agency needs improvement, no doubt. We can do some things at the margins to tighten up a bit. We can enhance the kind of competition for these visas so that they're not just whimsically handed out. But the point still goes that the basic concept is the United States an immigration society. We have been an immigration society. Our success has depended on that. And if we move out from under that, I don't know where that's going to leave us at the end of the day.
Thanks, really useful, Dennis. We'll come back to some of these issues. There is a cultural dimension also, which I think comes in. I'm sure we'll have that conversation. Let's move to our next speaker, Tahmina. Why don't the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to build on a lot of the things that Dennis mentioned here. But let me just set the foundation. It's very important that you mentioned, Sourabh, about the types of people who use this. The H-1B visas are country agnostic and industry agnostic. So those of you who do not know me, I'm a practitioner. I am a lawyer in Seattle, Washington at Watson Immigration Law. And my clients are small to medium businesses, startup founders, investors. And I'm here in my capacity as a lawyer and an author. And my clients at the moment are very much stressed and struggling. And it doesn't help that there's a government shutdown because we are simply not able to file H-1Bs at the moment. So the foundation of an H-1B, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1990 created the program. There is an annual cap of 65,000 visas for people who have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree from somewhere else, and 20,000 cap additional to that with people who have a master's degree from a U.S. school. So that's 85,000 in total. These are generally called cap subject H-1Bs. That's how we refer to them. But there is also cap exempt H-1Bs. That's if you're at a university, a non-profit. There are 4 types of employers who are cap exempt: non-profit organizations that have a university relationship, higher education institutions, government organizations, and non-profit research organizations. I have been privileged enough to work with people from all fields, whether they are researching orcas in Washington State, if they are teachers in public schools, if they are academics at higher education institutions, if they are therapists, mental health workers, Dennis just mentioned doctors. It is industry agnostic. And so it's very, very important to know that it's not just the big tech companies that use it. It's the the founders who have brilliant ideas to the companies that are scaling. And just this morning's headline had the NVIDIA CEO actually speak out about the H-1B, saying if the $100,000 was attached to visas when he immigrated, he would not be here. But think about that. That's NVIDIA. But today we are speaking on Zoom. Zoom was founded by a Chinese immigrant. what has he done for the innovation of the world and jobs that have been created? If you think about various different types of, WhatsApp, there are all these different types of things that we're using that have made America globalized and the world connected in minutes. These are all happening through immigrants who are in the United States primarily. And so who are they? They're coming to our universities. They are students at our university. Denis talked about PhD students. So to set the scene for people, who am I helping? What is the avatar of a typical H-1B candidate? The employer could be a big company. My clients are not the big companies, but the small to medium organizations. I have a lot of startups that are really, truly stressed at the moment. They will put the names of their employees who have probably been student trainees, the optional practical training program. And those of you who do not know, F1 is the visa category for students who are in school. When they graduate, they get 12 months of work experience called optional practical training. And if they have a STEM degree, they get an additional 24 months of optional practical training. So often these folks are going to our small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and of course the big Microsofts of the world too. And those are the employees that get put into the H-1B program. So that's a vast majority of them, but there are different categories of people. And so there is a direct correlation between what Denis mentioned about international students coming into the United States and then flowing in to the H-1B program. But who are they serving? They're serving the American consumers. They are serving the American people and the way that we are conducting our lives every day, whether it is through doctors, meeting our doctors, whether it's going to our lawyers, it's all around. So the unintended consequences that we will likely face from this is an immediate talent shortage, just as Denis mentioned. And I think the latest statistics that came out about international students coming into the US from all over the world is drastically down this year. And that has a number of other components. There are Department of State has laid off a lot of people. There aren't enough people at the embassies and consulates. There are new visa fees attached to it. There are just a number of things that are coming together that is going to be compounded by all of these new rules. We are going to see a brain drain in general. Denis just mentioned the K visa. But when we saw layoffs of H-1Bs a couple of years ago, Canada just swooped in and created an H-1B program. And it was filled within 48 hours. A couple of years ago, the United Kingdom created a program saying if you've gone to universities primarily in the United States, they peppered in a few others, and said if you have graduated from these schools, no questions asked, just come over here. When we had layoffs in the last couple of years, people went to other countries because the training that they have received, not just at our educational institutions, but at our corporate, global names such as, Amazon's and Microsoft's and different Google, the knowledge that they're taking from the hands-on experience, that is invaluable. So we are going to be losing talent that either cannot come here anymore or possibly don't want to be here anymore. And so we have a lot of issues on that. So what are our alternatives? Yes, maybe the H-1B visa needs some reform, but it has to come through Congress. Our laws are created through Congress, and Denis mentioned, Sourabh mentioned the APA, how regulations are created. We need to do it through that. And so Denis mentioned training. It's very important to understand the fees that are already attached. The I-129 form is a form that we file, and that form has a fee of about $760 or something along those lines. Then there is an additional form of a fee of $500. That's called the fraud fee, and that is so that USCIS can conduct investigations and make sure that the worker is actually at the place they say they're supposed to be at. But then there is something that we call the training fee. It has a very long name, ACREA fee, but essentially training fee. And if you have an employer with less than 26 employees, the fee is $750. And if you have more than 26 employees, it's 1,500. I have to tell you, for the last decade, I have been wondering what's happening with these training fees. Who gets the training fee? Who are we training? The mechanism is already built in to train American workers. But we do not have transparency on what happens with these fees. So we do need to figure out a lot of the things that already exist and how do we repurpose or have transparency on those. We're going to let Congress do its own job. And we need to figure out if there are specific concerns, address those specific concerns as opposed to just trying to have reform of immigration without actual reform. So we need immigration reform. And, as somebody who works with startup founders day in, day out, they're either the individuals, their cohorts, they're coming out of schools, or they're the, American-born startup founders who are doing their early recruits. We need a visa for startups. And President Obama did actually leave us with something called the International Entrepreneur Parole. That is essentially taking our bills that we had, the language of the various bills that were introduced for startups. It was turned into regulation, but for many reasons, it's not, usable. And so I think if resources were put in there and it was modernized so that startup founders can actually use it, it could really make a big difference. So I could talk about H-1B all day long, but I hope this is sufficient as a foundation of what is at stake for the American economy.
Thanks. That's really illuminating and that's helpful. Tahmina, can you tell me a little bit as to, obviously, as you mentioned, and also as Denis mentioned, this was just shot out of the blue. You talked about, there's talk about legal challenges. Where do they stand? This is Congress's domain, and the administration has just walked in and done what it wants to. So where do you see this proclamation it is going? So where do you see in 6 months' time, or how do you see the challenges kind of playing out? The legal challenges.
Good question. USCIS, and this is, established law, USCIS will charge the fees that are necessary for processing those cases. And every single one of those fees have always gone through rules and regulations every time there's an increase of 10% or 5%, etc. And the most recent fee increase happened, I want to say maybe 18 months ago. Time is a blur. And so the $100,000 really has no processing computation from, it's a number that's been plucked through the air. And it is questionable whether it is going to stand in the court of law. So last week, multiple organizations, multiple lawyers came together to file these lawsuits, and they are now, going through the motions of the legal challenges, and we will have to see where they stand. You have to remember that this particular administration is going to potentially appeal and then take the case possibly to the Supreme Court. So, we are absolutely in unprecedented times. But I do know that I am part of many different legal groups, conversations, Facebook groups, listservs and WhatsApp groups. We're all talking about H-1Bs. Can we file it today? Can we file it this way? Can we not file it? And, everybody should know there are two agencies that we have to deal with when we file H-1B visas. The Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has oversight over what the wage is. And then there's the Department of Homeland Security, where we file the H-1Bs under the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. The USCIS is actually still open because they are a fee-based agency. But the Department of Labor is not, and therefore they are closed. So right this minute, and I kid you not, the amount of stress that my clients are going through, we are discussing, several of them where statuses come to an end. Students are coming to the end of their OPT program. A lot of people who have different types of visas, they're coming to an end. If we cannot file what's called a labor conditions application for the wage promise, we cannot file an H-1B. And so there are different types of issues that are all sort of coming together. And, the challenges are enormous.
I can well imagine. Please, others also please feel to jump in if you all want to. I had one further question. You talked in terms of a startup visa, just as a way to kind of save the program, the H-1B program. Do you think it's a wise idea or it's an unwise idea? Let me back up a little bit. H-1Bs are not just for tech workers, it's across the board. Tech workers are the best placed to because their salaries are likely higher. But that's also been seen as a way that creates too many Indians and only tech workers, and there's potential abuse of the system. Do you think it's a wise idea or is it not a wise idea to kind of say within the H-1B cap the tech worker quota so that you can continue to have other diversity of other professions who could get H-1Bs who will now not get H-1Bs? What do you think on that front? Whether a cap is
I think that's a really good idea. I mean, what I would love is that if the administration brought a think tank of those who practice immigration law all the time, and then have some industry leaders come together and say, how can we make this fair and reasonable for the American workers, the American consumers, and industry in general? But what I will say is that I have been doing a lot of writing for the entire time I've been practicing, and I would draw attention to my Startup Visa book series. The first one came in 2013. It was published in 2015, but I started writing it then when immigration reform failed. If everybody remembers, we almost had immigration reform in 2013, and there was a startup visa bill in it. And I sort of really put a lot of time. I was working with a lot of lawmakers and policymakers, senators, about how can we have the perfect bill. And so it felt like I was losing a child. So that was my first book. And the first book is a policy book, The Startup Visa, Key to Job Growth and Economic Prosperity. And I go through all of the visas that we have in this country and why they don't necessarily work for startup founders. I think that would be very enlightening for a lot of people to understand the system that we have and why it doesn't work for specific counters. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I just want to make one point about OPT. Not only is the H-1B issue under duress, but there are, I think it's Senator Grassley that wants to also cut back on OPT training. In fact, he'd like to do away with it. He thinks it's a vehicle for industrial spying and industrial espionage, et cetera, by giving some foreign-born people access into U.S. corporate world, et cetera. So, I mean, the whole thing right now is in a very strange place. And we ought to know, just how dangerous this is overall. Because if we lose our attractiveness as a talent hub and people start to migrate elsewhere, not only people who won't come here, but people who are here now and will go someplace else, that'll be a big, that'll be a big problem. That'll be a big problem. So I think we ought to look at the broad picture here because none of it is actually very good. Most of it is very problematic.
Well, it's a very good point because just before the $100,000, proclamation was announced, there is actually a proposed rule. The comment period just closed where they're going to change the student visa duration. When an international student comes to the United States, they graduate, they seamlessly go into OPT for the 12 months and seamlessly go into OPT for the 24 months. There's no end date to how long they can be here. But the duration of stay proposed regulation is going to give a maximum 4 years to each international student, not maximum, but 4 years of students, and they have to apply to extend. You have to pay a fee, sign a form, and be at the mercy of an adjudicator to say yes or no. So there are some other peripheral issues that are all coming together. But I think it's a good point, Sourabh, that there are multiple ways in which this, the thing could be modernized. The H-1B can be modernized. And I think if we have industry leaders and practitioners and policymakers all come together, we could actually create a program for the next generation.
Thanks, Tahmina. That's very useful. We'll again get you back into the conversation later. Why don't we, the floor is yours, Yingyi. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I think both Denis and Tahmina have covered very important grounds. And I want to share with all of you that I'm teaching a class right now, and I had students debating and discussing all these issues and focusing on US-China competition. And I think the readings and our discussions all yielded to the similar consensus that if the US has anything that is superior to China now, that is unambiguous, is its ability to attract the talent from the rest of the world that China has not. Denis has raised a very important point that China just started this K visa, but we don't really know whether the K visa is going to be successful. China has not really been traditionally a land of immigrants. And there is an interesting quote of my colleagues that, the US has able to draw talent from a 7 billion population. China has only have access to 1.4 billion. I mean, that could be changed. But I think this is this H-1B visa most recent proclamation is one of the major, another self-defeating policy that the US administration has really trying to attack its own unique strength that is over many other countries, certainly including China. Okay, so that's one of the main points I want to start off. And specifically, I think in terms of, I think Denis is right. This bill is not really anti-China bill. Chinese students, even though has been the largest international student until 2024, it's only receiving 10 to 12% of H-1B visa because a lot of the visas are not really granted to international student turned immigrants. But H-1B visa is a very important, sometimes the only way for international students who want to stay in the United States. So there's this three-way link from admissions of international students to OPT, optional practical training. I think both Tahmina and Denis have mentioned, and then to H-1B visa. So in other words, for international students studying in the United States, wanting to stay here and becoming, legal immigrant from the non-immigrant visa to immigration, that is the only path, and the main path that people have to travel. So I think, we all looking at this AI talent, right? The most recent, big AI companies are competing for talent from Mega to OpenAI, and the people with Chinese names really are pretty prominent. And I sometimes wonder, so these people came to this country sometimes a decade ago, sometimes a few years ago, less than a decade ago. If they came here around this time, would they really still be able to contributing to the US economy and especially to this AI competition? And especially, I think some think tanks has produced this report that China has produced 50% of the top AI talent in the world. So a lot of those AI talent came here to the United States through graduate school. And we have not forgotten that US graduate school, we all talk about how Chinese government has this talent recruitment program. But it's not that I said this, it's a quote I produced, everybody can see it, from National Science Board, that the US graduate school has become the main US talent program because it's not just Chinese students, it's also Indian students, it's also students from all over the world came to the US graduate school after a lot of them are the best and brightest and getting their first degrees from their own country's top institutions, and they came through US graduate schools. And some of them choose to stay here. And the stay rates, especially at the doctoral degree level, is very high. For Chinese students, is 80%. So that could all be changed after this 100,000 the H-1B visa fee is going to be enacted. So now the question is, a lot of details has not really been hashed out yet. For example, what we do not really know is whether the cap exempt places, such as US higher education, such as people like me, who are foreign-born professors, we went through H-1B visa. and people who work in nonprofit research institutions. Those people who are traditionally exempt and still so exempt out of this 85,000 H-1B visa cap, do they have to also go through, or the universities, the research institutions, do they have to pay for 100,000 visa fee? If they have, I don't really know. I think the White House has been pretty much on the fence about it. There's no details yet confirmed. If they have to pay, I am really, really concerned about the future, not just the talent, but also the educators, the researchers, and ultimately the innovation and the basic science in this country. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Yingyi. I have a question for you, but I actually want to just go quickly once to Tahmina actually first. Do you have clarity if this 100,000 K is going to be applied to the NPOs and the cap exempt group? What are you hearing of late?
Really, really great question. As it is written, as things stand, there's no exemption on the 100,000. And currently, right this minute, I am working with cap exempt organizations where we've had these discussions. And right this minute, while the lawsuit is pending and we've had, clarification that if you're in the US at this moment, it doesn't apply. Some of my clients are going to give it a try, but for the shutdown, of course. We will give it a try for the cap exempt clients to file it. But if the employee were to travel and get a visa stamp at the embassy, that is when it will absolutely apply, because it's about a re-entry. So we are in a very confusing state of being, it's, because of the ambiguity. But at the four corners of the proclamation does say that, there's no exemption from the 100,000, no matter who you are.
Yeah. Thanks, Tahmina. Yingyi, can I question to you? Can you just place yourself in the shoes of a family, father, mother, son is in high school, a Chinese family. You're very familiar with how that must be. What is the conversation happening out there? Because US higher education is very expensive. And yes, there is a kind of premium if you have a US graduate degree back in China. But still, I mean, the thinking is that if you want, you would rather much prefer to be out there in the United States. As you said, 80% stay on in the United States. So how does that change the conversation and the calculation in terms of whether you should go to the US, to a US school in the first place?
A great question. I think there has been a lot of conversations. The conversations are full of anxiety, full of fear. And that ultimately really has been a driving force for the declining enrollments of Chinese students already. We are 30% down from the peak. And that is not just about the pandemic. A lot of countries has rebounded from the pandemic. And I think since the pandemic, there has been, it's not just I think Chinese students is a big driving force behind this. There's a uprise of intra-Asia migration. So in other words, universities in Hong Kong, in Japan, in Singapore, within Asia. So Chinese students still want to study abroad, but they might choose Asia as their top destinations. Of course, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom still are attractive. But I think the U.S. is definitely has the appeal has definitely dimmed, and I think this visa blow is adding to the trend. And you're right that there is this sort of this value of but return of investment is certainly getting down. The overseas credentials, including American credentials, is getting more and more devalued. So that's also contributing. Let's get to Denis.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, as you know, I ran a joint venture university. In the first year, we wanted 200 students and we got about 400 applications. Last year, they wanted 500 students. They got 12,000 applications. So the numbers of Chinese students whose families are saying, look, you can get a US style degree. You can go to NYU Shanghai, you can go to Duke Kunshan. If you're not going to a US one, you can go to Ningbo Nottingham, or you can go to Suzhou Liverpool. The point is that the emergence of these joint venture universities, and not only in China, I think Yingyi is exactly right. Nottingham, for example, has a campus in Malaysia. And a number of students I know that would have formerly gone to the US are now going to Nanyang University or NUS in Singapore. These have now become much more popular destinations. And why not? All of these places want to receive these students because they're top tier students. In other words, we're losing out. We've used the term best and the brightest. We're losing out on these. And another thing is happening. I just spent February to June in China this year, and I was at Tsinghua campus. And Tsinghua professors, many of them in STEM, are telling their best students, don't go abroad. Stay here. We have world-class universities. You can get a great training here. Many of the faculty have had overseas education, PhDs. So there's no necessity to go abroad now. So the dynamics of this, Sourabh, you are exactly right, have all begun to change. And that discussion is no longer by hook or crook, you got to get to America, to build your future. Now, basically, huge opportunities in China, huge opportunities, maybe not in the traditional economy, but in this high-tech cutting edge where AI, quantum computing, life sciences are all really moving ahead rather quickly. There's huge opportunity for people to build their career. So I wonder if we're ever going to be able to get back to what we used to think was the normal. I think we're in a new normal now, and we may not be going back to where we were.
Yes, since Denis mentioned Tsinghua, I wrote an article for Brookings I think in 2023, using the Tsinghua study abroad data, which is remarkable change. Tsinghua graduates a couple decades ago, 20 years ago, 70% of the graduating Tsinghua graduates study abroad, and their top destination is the United States. Now it's less than 10. So they're exactly following the advice of their professors. The best and brightest, the best students of Tsinghua choose Tsinghua for graduate school. Okay, so that's direct admission to Tsinghua. So that's exactly the change, the new normal, for sure.
My question to you is two questions, actually. One is, what if a prospective Chinese student was asking you that question, what would your suggestion, recommendation be with regard to should I come to the United States or not? That's one question. The second one was, and you talked in terms of the top cream, they're staying back in China. And I noticed this phenomena earlier with Japan, where the top University of Tokyo, Waseda students, they stayed back because they had jobs in the kind of the bureaucracy. They had entry into the top ministries, and so that would just take them right through, or in the top kind of trading houses, trading companies. So they were happier to do there rather than come to the US for a graduate degree, learn English that was hard to do. And so it was mostly the ladies, actually, who were kind of edged out, elbowed out within their own country, in their own system in Japan, who were coming in large numbers out here, at least in certain programs. Did you see that dynamic among Chinese students? Is that the case in China too, where now that they have better positions for the top cream, they'll stay out there? But maybe I shouldn't call it the second tier, but just those who can't break into the job market like that had been looking to the US, may now not look to the US. And what would your suggestions, recommendations be to them?
Great question. I think these two questions are really linked. So if people ask me this question, I have to say that, what are you looking for? What it is your background? in terms of both your family ability to pay, whether, as you said, American university is very expensive, right? For some for some parents and families, and they have to really pull all the resources together. For really, really wealthy people, it's not so much of a big deal, right? So depending on their academic backgrounds as well, as you said, the best and brightest, China has this very cruel Gaokao, very competitive, and the Tsinghua University, the top universities in China, their admission rates is lower than Harvard here in the United States. So most people cannot really make the cut, but they're able to get enrolled into high quality universities in the West, not just in the United States, but also in Australia, based on the world-class university rankings. They just have a wider access to those high quality institutions compared to if they just confine themselves to their domestic institutions only through Gaokao. So I think the Chinese education system, their college admission systems is still inherently very competitive and exclusionary, just only fit for high performing people who are very good at testing, So that itself set up the structural demand for a lot of Chinese students and their families still for overseas education. So I think that I hope my response addressed both of your questions.
Yeah, that's actually really helpful. That's a useful point that you just made, because I'm familiar, back in India, it's harder to get into the Indian Institute of Management at, it's a postgraduate, this thing, Ahmedabad, which is the #1, than it is to get into Wharton or to get into Harvard. It's harder to get in. It's just pure competition in terms of, and I mean, frankly, I don't know about China, but in India, they should be changing the means of how they bring students in, so you have a diversity, and it's not pure only how you did well in that entrance exam. Anyway,
just a plug-in, not for my own book, but for a new book on Gaokao. Just focusing on Gaokao, that book is gonna. I was very much with you. I agree with you that the systems, the college admission systems, the test-oriented systems in China and India should be reformed. But in the Chinese case, that book really shows how Gaokao is so crucial, and it's going to be still sustainable for a foreseeable future in China, in terms of not just talent selection, but also the perception of meritocracy and how the government is able to incorporate the best and the brightest through the system.
Thank you very much. That's great. Well, finally, Giovanni, let's turn to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I like to start with a few numbers and bring back the conversation to the United States, what this policy will do to American workers, American consumer, American people. So about a third of the innovation in the United States is done by foreign-born. About a third of the startup in high-tech are done by foreign-born. 40% of science and technology innovation is done by foreign-born. About a third to 40% of the new enterprises are created by foreign-born. This means that the inflow of foreigners in the US has generated a massive engine of economic growth. We have several studies that look at how the STEM worker from abroad are distributed in US cities, in US regions. And you find that in the cities that can attract more of these STEM workers, and many of them have come through H-1B, there is more growth of productivity, more growth of wages for Americans, more growth of employment for Americans. There is this concept that economists have, which is the local job and productivity multiplier. When you attract some smart people in some smart firms, these firms grow and they need more workers and more people that work there from all over the spectrum. So a firm that hire Indian tech worker, or an hospital that hire a European doctor, or a lab that hire Asian and Chinese engineer will grow, will produce more, and will also demand a lot more of local services and local goods, which are produced by American worker. Also, we'll need American manager, we'll need American lawyers, will need a structure around them that grows. And this concept of complementarity and local multiplier will benefit the rest of the economy, not just the innovative part of the economy. But on the innovative part of the economy, I want to emphasize a couple of things which have been said, which I think are crucial. This cap-exempt part of the visa, which, as we said, goes to benefit university, hospital, lab, this has been cap-exempt because the economic reason for it was so self-evident. These people are bringing so many benefits to the Americans in terms of innovation, growth, service to patients, service to technology, that seemed obvious that the Americans should try to attract as many as possible without cap. All the controversy, I would say, most of the controversy in the newspaper about the H-1B is on the capped part, in which some are arguing some big company are profiting, some other. But a lot of the problem came exactly from the cap, from the fact that this group was constrained, and so some company became specialized in participating to the lottery and asking for some. So before this all happened, I had been working on this 20 years, and my view was that the US system was already very old, very constraining, and very outdated. The US, though, had the incredible luck of having an amazing university and company system that attracted people from all over the world. It's true, as this has been said, if the US want to be the leader in technology and science, they need to get people, the best people, out of 7 billion, not out of 350 million who are happen to be born in the United States. That's the only way to do. And these very smart people are very sensitive to what condition they find in places where they go. So if they have to find a hostile situation, if it's very hard to come in the US, they are very easily diverted to Canada, to Australia. Even before, some will stay in China, some will stay in India, but many of them will also go to these other places. And the US leadership in the world of innovation and technology, which, by the way, is what drives the American economy. Innovation and technology generates growth in productivity, generates growth in jobs, firms expansion. And so we need a lot of workers to fill all of these services which are connected. All that is at risk and jeopardized. Now, let me say one more thing, again in numbers, and then I am happy to develop more. Not only, I think, the economic rationale, this idea of protecting American innovator, protecting American jobs is wrong, is incorrect. There is huge evidence that allowing these people, you are creating more opportunity and job for the US. We have a recent job, a startup has been mentioned, which is an important part. We have this recent research that look at foreign-born master students in the United States and look at whether, first of all, they are much more likely to create a startup in the US, foreign student, in spite of all the hurdles that we put and how difficult it is. Half of the startup in the last year created by master student in the US are created by foreign master student in the US. Astounding. But the second interesting thing is that if you look at the foreign master student who have come in the US, and you look at American student in the cohort of the master that studied with these people, the Americans who studied with them are more likely to create a startup as a consequence, because they talk to them. Many of them co-found a startup with a foreigner that otherwise would have been hard, because the foreigner bring new ideas. There are a lot of companies, very interesting mix of American and foreigners, which are startup. I always cite 2 or 3 in weird area. Chobani, the yogurt, is a Turkish innovator and an American worker who combine. Zumba, which is this yoga plus martial art, which has become the big trend into exercise, is a Colombian person who studied in the US and American, because they bring different ideas. So Americans are helped. They become better entrepreneurs. They become more likely to be entrepreneurs thanks to the inflow of foreigners, and foreigners created. So the economic rationale is wrong. Eliminating this is going to hurt economically and on a job market Americans. And the other thing I want to say, this does not even reflect the opinion of Americans. It's true, this government has been put up with a mandate. But if you look at all the poll of Republican and Democrat, and you ask, do the US need more skilled worker from abroad? Would it be good to bring skilled worker from abroad? The last poll that you look from Pew, from American Enterprise Institute, all the serious polls show that 70 to 80% of Americans will tell you we need more of these people. Republican, 65 to 70%, they want more of this group. So at least this segment of the immigration is more uncontroversial, much more than the rest, because Americans will want more. And so we have a situation in which out of thin air, a huge fee has been picked up that essentially completely stymies and reduces the inflow of Americans. There is no economic rationale. By the way, there is no economic rationale in this 100,000 fee, because if you're really serious to reduce abuse, then maybe you will prioritize by wage that is paid. Maybe let's choose first the company that pay higher wage. You may or may not agree, but at least there is an economic rationale. You will protect still the cap exempt because they provide a public service. No, this is a one measure fits all 100,000 that kills the system, which has no economics in it, which has no benefit for the US, does not reflect the opinion of the Americans. And now we're licking our wounds, trying to figure out what it means, just out of a sheer prejudicial attitude towards immigrants that I think is extremely damaging for the US. I think that's the picture.
Thank you. Go ahead, Tahmina, please.
Well, first of all, so much knowledge, so much wealth of and depth of knowledge that, as we've just heard from Giovanni, it's news, you know, it's everything that I would normally say too. I want to just add and build on what he said about the wage rule. So not only did we see the proposed rules for students of duration of stay, and then we saw the 100,000. Following from that, there is a proposed rule just about hanging out there that's waiting for comments, where the government is actually going to change the lottery system. Right now, the lottery, as we've spoken, is $65,000 for bachelor's degree holders and $20,000 for master's degree holders. That is how the selection happens. All of the people get put in the bucket, and the 20,000 are selected first, and then the rest are put in there again, and then you get selected. And that's why PhD and master's students get a better chance of being selected. But for 2026, what they are hoping to do with this regulation is make it a wage-weighted rule, meaning that if you are getting a higher wage, level 4, there are 4 levels. Level 1, entry level, very experienced, level 4. If you are getting a level 4 wage, you will have 4 chances at the lottery. If you get level 3, then 3 chances, 2 and 1. And so by the time you get to the entry level, 85,000 visas are going to be gone. But these levels are based on the experience necessary for the job, not necessarily how much experience that person has. And so there's a very complicated analysis that goes into how we determine what the job is. For example, in computing jobs, you could be a computer analyst, you could be a data scientist, you could be, software developer. There are codes by the Department of Labor, and they attach the wage through the census tracts, etc., research that a DOL does. And the salary for Kansas City, for example, is very different from New York City for each of these levels. So it is actually going to, the 100,000 coupled with the wage rule that will go in is actually going to have a very detrimental effect. And we'll have to see what happens with the wage rule, because it's currently pending, waiting for comment. So anybody listening to this, go and find the rule. There's still time to actually comment. But I wanted to just add to what Giovanni said. Very, very
I agree with Tahmina that all this is going to make things more complicated and is going to add hurdles. I would say that the $100,000 per se is going to essentially kill this system, because even if this worker create value added for the firm, 100,000 is a very tall cost to pay. And one thing that economists have always said is that there are other more efficient way of distributing the visa, and we should go in that direction. And I wrote about auction, about other ways of doing this. But what I think is that the current goal is not to increase the efficiency of the distribution, it's just of cutting the system, of reducing the system with the false ideas that all in a sudden some jobs will pop up for Americans, which has been proved time and again is not how the economy works.
You know, I know that Dennis is waiting. I just want to add something about what Giovanni said about job creation, the multiplier effect. And I just want to paint the picture. When you have, not only are you creating jobs within the company, but there are jobs that are outside the company too. So if you are, let's say, a software developer somewhere, you actually need an accountant. You need, you go to the grocery store, you go to the dry cleaners, you probably need a gardener, different types of jobs that are not necessarily professional. There's a combination of professional and non-professional jobs that get created. And there are statistics out there about, one H-1B job could, on average, create 5, non-H-1B jobs for American workers within the company and outside the company. So job creation is an inherent part that naturally happens because every individual needs, peripheral help in their lives, and those are through different workers. So passing it on to Dennis.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, no, one of the things that we haven't looked at, which is a logical consequence of this, is an increase in offshoring of these jobs by companies who have a global footprint. In other words, if you can't find the talent within the United States, or you have to pay a high bounty, then why not build up a service center or a programming center somewhere else? So when we went into this big period of time where everyone was doing offshore, subcontracting and all this, and then we, had this big pull of jobs back to the United States. One of the consequences of all this clearly could be that companies are deciding, you know what, I can't solve my talent problem here in the United States. I'm going to have to build out some service facilities or other kind of parts, components, facilities, and do that. Maybe it's close by, maybe it's in Canada, maybe it's in Mexico, maybe it's back somewhere in Asia. The point is that we could end up in R&D, prototyping, testing, all these kinds of functions that we were hoping to bring back here. We may end up now seeing some of them again move offshore if we don't have a segment of the labor force that's ready and available for these. So we may end up with the loss of jobs because these are not jobs that Americans are necessarily going to be trained or prepared to do.
I agree, and if the job and the research center goes to Canada, all the connected jobs that Tahmina is talking about also go to Canada. All the accountant and the other multiplier effect goes to Canada. So people say, okay, wait, why don't you just outsource this type of functions if it's hard to get people? Because yes, you could, and you will. First, you lose the leadership in that type of research, which now is here. Second, you lose all the aggregated and connected and multiplied job, which are here. So double whammy to the American productivity and job creation capacity. Very big loss.
No, I just want to add.
Sorry,
Saurabh. Just want to add, Dennis makes a really good point. And in 2007, 8, or 9, I think some of the big companies actually did do that, because there's a visa called L1 visa, multinational transfer visa, and some companies will often do that, but it's not feasible for everybody, particularly when, you're a brand new startup here in the US and you've got, a lot of things tied to what you're doing in the US. It's not necessarily feasible. So I just wanted to add that it has been done for some situations, but it cannot be the way US companies can function because it's incredibly detrimental. And I just want to make sure that the question that I'm getting at the moment is, what other visa can I use in this situation? What if I were to have a company outside? Can I come back on a different visa? And so the second book in my startup visa series is actually a visa guide. It's called Visa Guide for Startups and Founders, but it's actually all of the visas that could be used by anybody. And that is what people are looking at. What can we do? But the conditions for each visa, which goes to my first book, the conditions are not necessarily right for a professional worker who just needs to be an architect in an architecture firm. So what Dennis says has a lot of merit, and I think we might see that companies will try to establish, but it will not necessarily be the right thing because all of the losses that Giovanni's talking about too. So it's important to remember the H-1B visa is a very, very important component of our immigration visa system until we have reform to address these different issues that the administration wants to address.
Thanks, Tahmina. Giovanni, one question for you. Just broad, this is kind of stepping back, broad conceptual question. The benefits are obviously so self-evident. You've been studying this area for a long period of time. Just in your view, what are the drivers of the U.S. administration?
Sorry, what are the drivers? I didn't hear.
Yeah, why do you think it's doing this? I mean, I brought up earlier very briefly about the cultural element.
Yeah.
Think of Japan. They have an immigration, but they'd rather have less productivity but have their own little homogeneous little group.
Yeah.
That's one of the fundamental drivers here.
So I think that even in the Republican parties, historically, there have been two groups of people, two ways of thinking about immigration. There has been always a large business-driven, economy-driven type of group. And they have been very often the allied of pro-immigration people. Tahmina referred to the 2013. There was a bipartisan bill that, in fact, had a lot of Republicans which were very pro-immigration in the view of economic benefit, openness, and then there is a group in the party that I think is just against immigration for very ideological and very, sort of non-economic and non-fact-based reason. Right now, the president bounces between these two. If you remember, during the campaign, he even said something very positive about immigration. If you have studied in the US and you have a STEM, you should get the visa, he said. But now is this group. I think that the anti-immigration on, call it cultural, ideological reason, is extremely well organized and very determined. And right now, I think they are taking the lead into drafting all the measures. As you say, look at all the measures of immigration, starting from deportation, from reduction of students, from H-1B impact, from putting hurdle on legal immigration. They want to reduce legal and undocumented immigration. And so I think there is no real good economic rationale for this. And I think the ideological part is totally prevailing in this design. And you are right. We need to decide if the future of the US is a future of an aging, smaller, closer economy where growth stagnates and in the longer run we have a lot of elderly people as Japan, or of a leader in the world where the economy grows, the innovation comes from being open to people and ideas and going forward. And I think right now we are choosing the first. These measures are choosing the first, in my view. How long they last and how much people push back and how much the internal dynamics also of the Republican Party will change this or not will determine a lot of the future of the economy, of the innovation, and of the science, and of the aging, by the way, of the United States.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Great. You know what? Let me open up. We are into our last 10 minutes. Let me open up the conversation to everybody. There are two questions. I'll get to the questions. But before that, I just wanted to run a question by Denis. And that question was, from your standpoint as a university administrator, just talk a little bit what the impact of this is going to be on higher education institutes, not on students, not on kids, tech workers, on the universities. How do you see they're seeing this, and what do you think the impact will be?
So for most of the 80s and 90s, internationalization of universities was a big deal. That is, the universities, if they had any substance, they wanted to expand their global footprint. And global footprint meant more international students, recruiting faculty from around the world, researchers, etc. In other words, to become more globally engaged. But if we're seeing, a kind of walling off of the United States in some ways to immigration and other things, the nature of the university itself is going to have to change. We've already seen there are new administrative apparatus now put in place. For example, we used to have simply a vice provost for international affairs. That person was responsible for what we called inbound and outbound, the study abroad and also international students coming. fine. But now we have all sorts of compliance mechanisms that are now in place. Security officers who have to make sure that export controls and other kinds of policies are being followed in these cooperative and international exchange programs. There will now be perhaps even, I think there's going to be what we call a red light, yellow light, green light system, where eventually universities are going to say, okay, we can cooperate here in environmental science, but we can't cooperate in AI. And there are going to be fields that are going to be cordoned off, I think. I think that's where we're headed. A number of people in the Congress, I've testified before, have asked me, why should we allow all these foreign students into the United States? And they're only going to go back to become our competitors. So, if you look at the world, as us versus them, then you get a certain model of how you look at these. That sort of defines and shapes the perspective. If you look at it as we're open, we live in a globalized world, there's international talent mobility, people are moving, knowledge is moving, capital is moving, but we've entered this period of fragmented globalization, and that's affecting how universities now describe themselves in terms of their international commitments. I know some universities, Case Western University, for example, they did away with their international affairs vice provost. No more. Duke no longer has an international affairs vice provost. Because that part of their agenda now, for all the political reasons, has to be steered directly out of the president and provost's office to make sure there's no missteps going on.
Sorry, if I can add one thing on the, it will also have a big impact on the budget of the university. A public university like University of California has relied on funding state students by admitting more out of state and out of country students who pay a much larger fee. So there is a mass cross subsidization that goes on in the public university, which are doing a lot of the research and the teaching in this country, from international students to national students. If you cut that part, the plan of UC was to expand thanks to the increase in the number of these students. If you cap the number of these students, the American students are going to be fewer. There are going to be less growth in that, and a lot of the expenditure in labs, in research, in structure will go. Or tuition will go up. The alternative will be that the tuition, they will have to pay more for their education, right? So there is a cost also for American students of this fact.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was getting at. The question I wanted to ask was about the finances from the financial side. Okay, let's go to, I see two questions out here. Let's get to the first one, question, anyone out here. What kind of backlash do you expect for the people in the US who already have an H-1B visa? Are they in any sort of jeopardy per se, those who are on existing H-1B visas? Just anyone tell me?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, when that rule came out Friday morning, the proclamation, and as the proclamation is written, it said if you have a valid H-1B visa or any H-1B visa, you're going to have to pay the $100,000 on the Sunday when you come in. So the sheer panic that immigration lawyers faced on that Friday, and until the White House made, an interpretation of, Saturday 4 p.m., none of us actually slept or, were able to relax. There were people around the world who are on H-1Bs saying, I need to get a flight back. Big companies like Microsoft and Amazon, they sent a company-wide email to their workers saying, wherever you are in the world, come back by midnight Saturday night, because it absolutely was going to affect them until that interpretation from the White House came. Interpretation should not be coming, third hand, second hand. It should be within the four corners of a document. So luckily that has subsided. But what is happening now is, the question initially, days after, that stress sort of went away is, can we file H-1Bs in the US without, paying the 100,000? And that clarification came saying you do not have to pay the 100,000 at the moment. But what we do know, what I think is going to happen is in 2026, when the lottery happens for people who get selected, no matter how this lottery gets, set, whether it's wages or degree, the 100,000 will be affecting those people in the US. But the people currently at the moment in the US on valid H-1Bs sort of have a reprieve But once something goes into effect, there is a natural tendency to expand it to others. So while there is reprieve now for people who are currently here, I don't know if that will necessarily continue. And I think it's important that those who are on visas should think about their green cards and whatever they need to do to secure their status even, stronger than an H-1B. I see Yingyi.
Actually, I had a very, very quick follow-on and for you, but others can also jump in. And that being, do you think this is going to be broadened out to wider visa categories? Will it stick to just H-1B? Will it be widened out to other categories? And do you think it might also be widened out to kind of place impediments on the pathways to green cards? What do you think?
It's a really, really good question. I don't know if I've had any hints of that, although, it came out of thin air, as Giovanni said, for this particular one, so who knows? But what I will say is that the pathway that people use to get green cards is typically something called an EB1, employment-based first preference category. There's the announcement of a gold card that will use the EB1 green card numbers. So that will, a lot of people from India, China, Philippines, Mexico, they take longer to get their green cards. Those people will absolutely be affected. And then with the government shutdown, the normal green card pathway is actually closed because the system is closed. When there are companies that have layoffs, they have a lot of restrictions in what they can do to prove that they need a worker. There are many other things on the green card path that is going to affect, long-term visas. And we'll have to see what's going to happen. What I feel that's happening is sort of an immigration reform through, these announcements that will eventually trickle into regulation. But what we really need is Congress to say, we make the laws. Let's make the laws that are, good for the country.
Let me come, I think we're almost time's over. Let me come to the one last question, which I see in the question box. And that is a question with regard to, suppose all these things do come into fruition and all these pathways are blocked. Over a long term, do you think just domestic US talent will over the long term be able to substitute for this lack of international talent? Where do you come down on how you see this, if this does become the new norm, the new normal?
I think Giovanni has mentioned a series of statistics. I just want to mention one thing. The domestic talent is not sufficient, especially in STEM areas. If you're just looking at not just Nobel Prize, just recently released, but also the new generation, the International Olympia, Science Olympia, Math Olympia, they're almost disproportionately, if not uniformly, populated by children of immigrants. So in other words, a lot of their parents are potential H-1B visa recipients, and they're going through this skilled immigration pathway and brought their children here. And they are now they may count as domestic talent. What I'm saying is the STEM talent in this country are disproportionately immigrants and children of immigrants. What happens to the domestic education system? That is a larger question. The National Science Foundation has always invested billions of dollars trying to get more of the US students majoring in STEM, majoring computer science. That is not going to work. The US most popular major is still psychology, communication. It's not engineering. But in China and India, has always been in STEM fields.
I just want to confirm what Yingyi said. A country that wants to be the leader in the world needs to attract people from all over the world to do science and technology. I hope that there are going to be fantastic American-born engineers and scientists, but American-born kids want to do also theater and film and other things. And it's part of being an advanced country, the idea that we can allow American kids to be this, and we can still be at the top of technology, because a lot of people all over the world want to come to the United States and they become the next engineer, when some American wants, and some American instead wants to be the next lawyer or the next accountant. I think a healthy, growing economy needs the foreign talent, even as it's nurturing its domestic talent and is giving choices to people in the United States about what they want to do.
We should say thank you.
We
should say thank you for coming.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you to all. I will have to leave it out there. Let me just say a last thank you to Denis Simon, Tahmina Watson, Giovanni Peri, Yingyi, of course, she's left. It's been